I'm going to try to go ahead and tackle today. Lots of broccoli florets. I have a cabbage in here. I harvested this one because it's split, but I have to go back down to the garden because I was checking this morning as I was out doing morning chores, and I saw that my other cabbages out there are splitting too. So I need to get those harvested. I don't know if that's going to be a project for today or another day. I also have a lot of celery in the garden that needs to come out, but I think I need to try to tackle this stuff before I go get more from the garden and bring it in. I also have smaller broccolis in here, some more tomatoes, lots of trilogy beans, green beans in the bottom of this. This is a 22 quart bowl and it's completely full. So we need to get through this. I also have this, which is full of tomatoes. We need to go ahead and get this taken care of. I think this is going to be destined to become salsa. So I think that's what I'm doing with this today. I have a lot of sweet corn from the orchard. I think we're gonna make corn relish out of this, just because not all of this corn is super beautiful or super sweet. It was a first year growing corn. We did have some really great corn cobs, very sweet, very delicious. Some of them I think went a little over on the corn stalks. They should have been taken earlier. They got a hair bitter, so I think it would be better off making them into a relish, canning them with some other things, with some sugar and things to make them back to being delicious. So I think that's what this is going to be. I also have a lot of corn cobs in the fridge that are also going to be relish. There's also potatoes at the bottom of this bucket, and then this bucket is full of shallots and onions that I've just been kind of slowly going through. The rest of the onions are in the shop curing, so lots of things going on, lots of things happening. Plus, I have this gallon bag of green beans and broccoli. There are some carrots in here as well. I already have water on the stove. We're gonna blanch these off. This is gonna go in the freezer. Typically how I do things is I will harvest things, bring them in from the garden. I try to wash them right away and put them in the fridge. That way, everything that's in the fridge is clean, it's ready to go, it's ready to be used, it's cleaned, everything like that, and it's easy to throw in for dinner, for snacks. The kids will also just open the bag and eat these raw. I do that all the time too, it's delicious. So these are kind of getting a little bit past their prime. If we're not gonna eat them within the first couple days, I try to blanch them and get them in the freezer, because every day after they're picked, they're losing nutrients, they're losing all the beautiful things that make them great. So these have been in the fridge for a couple days. We're gonna blanch them, get them in the freezer. We made these together in a recent video. I can try to link that down below. We had these Friday night for dinner. It's Monday. No one ate them throughout the weekend. I want to put these in the freezer. Right away, starting off, the first thing I wanted to do was make sure that I was actually washing all of my vegetables. I normally wouldn't necessarily rinse off my tomatoes if I were peeling them, but in this recipe that we're doing today, we're not peeling them, so I definitely wanted to make sure I was going to give them at least a little bit of a rinse off. I wanted to dump everything in my sink, just get it going. I also needed to rinse out this pot because I wanted to use it to make my salsa in. My plan was to get all of these vegetables washed while our broccoli was blanching, and by the time it was done blanching, have all this out, the sink empty, and us ready to drain off our blanched vegetables, rinse them in some cool water, and get them in the freezer for flash freezing. That was my plan, and it ended up working very well. So I just took our bag here, dumped it in my boiling water. If you don't know, the reason you want to blanch vegetables is because there's actually an enzyme in vegetables that slowly breaks down the vegetable over time, and blanching it kills off that enzyme. So essentially you're shocking that vegetable to stay in the exact same state that it currently is in, and it's not going to decay or just continue to age in the freezer, because that enzyme does live in freezing temperatures. So blanching just kind of stops all of that aging process and keeps it at peak freshness. You don't always have to blanch vegetables. There are definitely things I don't blanch, but I do blanch a good portion of our vegetables. I was sorting and taking all the stems off of the tomatoes, getting those kind of set aside, and everything that I was left with in the sink for either broccoli or green beans, a trilogy bean, I just put in a separate bowl and set aside because I knew that I wanted to use those for dinner. So it was a little bit of dinner prep, a little bit of canning prep, and just kind of getting everything rotated and trying to make the most out of my time in the kitchen. That's definitely the key for me on canning days or preserving days where I have a couple of projects that I need to get through, is I try to actually sit down and think about what is the most efficient way to do things in order, so that I'm not running around or kind of just acting a little bit flustered. It's a little bit more streamlined, especially on a day where my husband isn't here to help or my big kids aren't here to help. Just making sure that everything kind of lines up very nicely. It feels a lot less stressful that way. But you will see I do get my little kids involved as well in jobs that they can help with, so you'll see them in a little bit here helping to prepare some things for this canning day as well. I love to blanch vegetables because there are a lot of things that I don't necessarily loved canned. Green beans and corn are one of them. I'm not saying that I would never can those items, because I definitely do see myself potentially pressure canning some of those things eventually, but I and my family definitely prefer the more fresh tasting vegetables that are frozen. So that's why we tend to do things this way, and I think it's a lot more time efficient. This is where the little kids got involved. Cleo was helping pull corn. She absolutely loves this job. She is almost offended if I go to peel corn and I do not ask if she wants to help. So her and Colt were helping me peel some of the corn from the orchard. I gave them a big compost bowl and they were very efficient at peeling all of the corn while I started peeling and prepping some of our onions for the canning recipes that we needed to do. This is one of those things where being prepared helps. I went ahead and just kind of checked how many cups of onions I was going to need for both of the canning recipes and just kind of guessed how many onions I needed to peel and get washed and rinsed and kind of prepped for this canning day. Anything that I peeled that didn't end up going into the canner, oh, you can see why Cleo loves this job so much. She loves to eat the corn. She loves to eat the corn. But anything that I peeled that didn't end up going into a canning recipe, I just put in a Ziploc bag and put it in the fridge, and I will use it over the next couple of days for dinners. I also have a couple freezer meals that I want to get going while I have all of this really fresh, great produce. I also had some lid failures in the salsa that we're canning today, so I would like to take some of those and just make them into freezer meals and some chicken marinades or something like that, instead of just kind of letting them sit in the fridge, because I have quite a few jars that didn't seal for me, unfortunately. Here I have some of our more successful corn that we've grown. This is already cooked. It's been in the fridge for a couple of days. This is we're going to make into corn relish, plus on top of whatever we were able to get off of our less successful corn on the cob pieces that don't look as beautiful, but that's a-okay. Colt is finishing up peeling the last two corns of cobbed corn, peeling the last two cobs of corn, and I got the onions that I needed for today taken care of, prepped outside. I've been doing a lot more of my prep work outside recently. It's keeping my kitchen much cleaner, and I'm really enjoying that. So there's that. Today when we can, we might even actually go outside. I have my outside propane oven stovetop thing set up outside. We might can outside today, so we'll see what happens. But we are going to scrape these off of the cob. Thank you, dude. I'll take it right here. Perfect. Thank you so much. White orders. Perfect. I love them, buddy. I'll keep them separated. So you can see some of these are less successful, but they'll still work. We are using this traditional corn relish recipe out of the Ball Home Preservation Complete Cookbook. I love this cookbook. It is a little bit of an investment. It's, I think, around $30, but so worth it. I have it linked down below if you are interested in it. So many great recipes, not just water bath canning, but also pressure canning. They have some meals, all sorts of good things in there. It's a very good cookbook. I'm using this purple cabbage because that's what I had in my fridge, and I really wanted to use it up. I also thought it would look beautiful in the jars, and it gave them a really nice purple color. So what I decided to do, because a lot of this corn just is not great. The camera really isn't picking it up, but I don't really think it's worth it. All these are very teeny tiny corn cobs and a lot of them are missing. So I'm just gonna give these to the chickens. The chickens will enjoy this a lot more than we will. So I'm going to cut my recipe in half for this corn relish because that's just what I have enough corn to do. No problem, I've never made this before anyways, and in new recipes I tend to like to do a smaller batch anyways. Once again, I'm trying to make the most out of my time in the kitchen. These days can be a little bit more tricky because there's a lot of stop and starts because I have to pause in the middle of the day to get Colt on the bus to go to school, and this day was no exception. So a lot of times I am racing the clock, just trying to get a lot of my prep work done before that happens. I'm going to wash up about half a cup of these onions. I'm just going to rinse them off, chop them up, and get them in the Dutch oven as well. So you're gonna see this here. Sometimes that can be a little bit difficult for me, but I went ahead and got all of my vegetables chopped and in the Dutch oven. I stopped and got Colt on the bus and forgot that I was only having this recipe. So that's why you're seeing me panic here for a second and I'm going, oh shoot, I did not actually need all of this sugar. So I'm scooping out kind of whatever I can and then we're gonna roll with it. I'm hoping that it's okay. I did taste it and it didn't taste overtly sweet, just because, like I said, some of our corn that we grew in the orchard went over a little bit and it got a hair bitter, so I think it actually needed the extra sugar, so it worked out. But sometimes having to stop in the middle of a canning recipe, I can forget what I'm doing, especially if I'm not exactly following the recipe. Like on this day I was only having it because that's only the amount of corn that I had. So while my corn relish was cooking down on the stove with everything that it needed in it, I went ahead and started prepping my salsa here. And I've canned this salsa recipe a handful of times. It is out of that same cookbook. It is the traditional salsa recipe. I really like it. I am making this batch a little bit more spicy than our last batch. My husband is deciding that he wanted to have some variety of salsa on the shelf and asked if I could make a little bit of a spicier option. The way I made this a little bit more spicy, you're not going to see it here, but I did chop up cayenne pepper and put that in this relish to kind of fulfill just part of the peppers. This is a green pepper, but I also did chop up that cayenne pepper. I also added in a little bit of extra hot sauce to the recipe, which is safe. You can do that. So part of canning is just knowing what in the recipe you can change if you want to. The pepper to tomato ratio is something that you cannot change, so the overall amount of peppers have to stay the same, but you can mix in sweet and hot peppers and it will still be canning safe. By the time I got all of my salsa put together, it was time to can the corn relish, which was exactly what I wanted. So my corn relish and my salsa both can for 15 minutes. So I wanted my water bath canner up on the stove, warming up so that I could put all of my corn relish and all of my salsa into the canner at the same time. I had just the perfect amount of jars to do one load, which is honestly like the best thing ever. I love when that happens. I'm not that good. It just happened that way. You're gonna see I have a little bit of extra corn relish here in the Dutch oven that wouldn't fit in the jar, but wasn't enough to put into another jar. So I just put it in a jar and put it in the fridge, and we are using it kind of like a quick pickled relish. We put it on top of some tacos recently and it was pretty good. So we did get to try it, and I think it'll be a fun little additive to switch things up over the winter, especially when it can be the end of the month and we don't have a lot of fresh produce around, but we still want to do tacos or enchiladas or something. I think this would be just fun to mix it up. Variety, I have found, is key for our family. Having things on the shelf that we don't necessarily want to use every single day, but things that we can use to mix up some of our favorite recipes is really great. And I think that's what this corn relish is going to be. But because I've never made it before and I didn't have my family around to necessarily try it, I liked to have this recipe. I never want to go full force when doing a new recipe, because if we don't like it, then it just sits on the shelf and it's wasted time and wasted resources, and that's never a good thing. So I typically will have recipes, it just depending on how much the actual recipe says that it's going to make, just because I don't want to make a ton of jars. I threw in some of our window cilantro into our salsa and also got that canned up, rings wiped, lids on, and loaded these into the canner as well with my corn relish. We let that go for 15 minutes, pulled it out, and we had lots of jars ready for the canning shelf for the winter ahead, which is always the goal. While my things were pressure canning, while my things were water bath canning, excuse me, I sat down, I spent some time with Cleo, we played. A lot of times I get comments on how do I do things with kids, specifically the little kids that still require like a lot of attention and a lot of playtime. And that really is, I A, try to get them involved, or B, as the kids get a little bit bigger, I tend to save a spot on my kitchen island for the little kids to sit up there, and I will bring out tabletop toys or a tabletop activity. This day you wouldn't see it, but Cleo was playing with Play-Doh up on the counter, or she was coloring up on the counter, so I can still talk to her and interact with her and she still feels involved, but she's not necessarily like under my feet or something like that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope wherever you are having a fantastic day, and I will catch you guys in another one. Lost inside my thoughts, and when I start to think, oh, the tunnel closest starts to end up on the bridge.